Welcome to Oriental Journeys podcast, a podcast inspired by the travels and writing of the legendary traveler Ibn Battuta. My name is Rebe Houdi, your host today. This podcast is produced in partnership with Monash University.
We came to a little island in that archipelago in which there was but one house, occupied by a weaver. He had a wife and family, a few cocoa palms and a small boat, with which he used to fish and to cross over to any of the islands he wished to visit. His island contained also banana bushes, but we saw no land birds on it except two crows, which came out to us on our arrival and circled above our vessel. And I swear I envied that man and wished that the island had been mine, that I might have made it my retreat until the inevitable hour should befall me.
Ibn Battuta, one of the most noted explorers of the medieval world, narrated a series of first-hand observations on the destination he reached over almost 30 years of travels in 14th century. This Moroccan traveler passed through an astonishing extent of places, encountering diverse people. His observations, experiences and encounters tell us a lot about what life was like in medieval times, with fascinating relevance to now. Guided and inspired by Ibn Battuta's footsteps, this podcast opens a portal into the world of the East for people who are curious about the past, hungry for the marvels of traveling and contemplate the wonders of cities. Accompany us over our journeys into the distant, unfamiliar and unknown. In this episode, we will explore Ibn Battuta's travelogue and search to find out more about him and his travels with Tim Mackintosh-Smith, who has dedicated his life tracing Ibn Battuta. Tim is a British Oxford-educated Arabist writer, traveler, translator and lecturer based in Yemen for many decades but currently nomadic. He is one of the foremost scholars of the Moroccan traveler Ibn Battuta. He has published a trilogy recounting his journeys in the footnotes of Ibn Battuta, Travels with A Tangerine, The Whole of 1,000 Columns, and Landfalls. In 2007, Mackintosh-Smith presented a major BBC documentary series, Travels with A Tangerine, recounting his experiences tracing Ibn Battuta's 14th century travels in the present day. In 2016, he also published an edited abridgement of the Travels of Ibn Battuta with Macmillan's Collector's Library. Welcome, Tim, to this episode and thank you for accepting the invite. Tim, we have just listened to a marvelous account in the beginning of the episode where Ibn Battuta passing by an isolated island located in Indian Ocean as he was departing Maldives. What is your insight on his observations?
I think it really is it's a splendid choice of passage because it says a lot about him. If we look a bit at the background, he's in the Maldives, or he's been in the Maldives, and he has been right at the centre of power. He became Chief Justice of the islands, and he held that position for about a year. He married into the ruling family, so he really got to the top of the tree. In that small island sultanate of the Maldives. But then he got himself embroiled in politics and apparently got mixed up in a sort of planned coup, and he got found out, so he had to leave very quickly. And obviously all of this was weighing heavily on his spirit. And there he is sailing past this little Maldivian island. It's probably now a tourist resort. And he sees the man with his family and his fishing boat and his banana bushes and wishes that he could live there until the inevitable hour, until the time of his death. And you can just sort of feel his spiritual yearning, having been, really marrying into the ruling family and getting right to the top of the social scale, and he wants to cash this all in and live on a desert island. We tend to think of tourism and wanting to live to stay on desert islands in the Maldives or small islands as a modern phenomenon. No, we learn from Ibn Battuta that it was part of the human spirit at that time.
You exhibited the account so graphically, Tim. Thank you. As you truly said, this passage is a condensed output of what Ibn Battuta has passed through during his pretty long stay in Maldivian islands, and you beautifully unveiled it for us. After listening to your insights on a passage from the Travels, I would like to delve into your own story. You have devoted your life tracing Ibn Battuta through studying his travelogue and have sought to be his travel companion over a space of 700 years, which is a lot. Can you tell me what is in Ibn Battuta Travels that resonates with you?
I think it's partly what I just mentioned, that it's the way that from time to time he bears his soul and he comes across as a real person. Often he comes across as a real person, warts and all, as the saying goes. If you remember Cromwell, who ruled England for a time, somebody was painting his portrait and he said, "Paint me warts and all, with all the faults that I have." And Ibn Battuta he's quite a simple guy in the sense that he writes this book, but he never really hides anything. He projects an image of himself at times as a great scholar and a great traveler and so on, but he can't help his real human self to come through. And well, I'll give you an example. He's in Oman and he's walking along the coast. He's had a bit of a problem and he's sort of got a bit stuck, and he does this walk along the coast. And he trudges along and he says, "Oh, it was so far, and the ground was so hard, and it was so difficult that the blood came out from underneath my toenails." And, you would think that he kind of walked the length of the coast of Oman. It's really not very far. I did it. I traced his exact route, and it was a couple of hours. Okay, the ground was a bit stony. I suppose I had walking boots, and he would have had sandals. But this complaint, he complains time and again. It makes him really a sort of anti-hero. A lot of the attempts to portray him show him as this great hero, this great explorer, but it's these revelations of his very human side that I love. And of course, he was a hero as well, but he wasn't really a traditional hero. If I can give you another example, when he's in India, he's been appointed ambassador to China, Indian ambassador to China, big thing. And the Sultan of Delhi sends him off with this great present of slaves and horses and God knows what else. And they all embark on ships at Calicut in Caravan, southwestern India. And in the night, a storm blows up, and all the ships are lost, and the present is lost, and all his friends are lost. He stayed on shore, so he was safe. But he's standing there looking at the scene of where the ships had been, and some of them were wrecked. People were drowned, and others were driven away, and he didn't see them again. But he's standing there on the shore with, I think he says, "I only had a prayer carpet with me and my slave boy, and the slave boy ran away." So there he is, having been again really at the top of things, and he's reduced to nothing, only having a prayer carpet, no money, no nothing. He can't go back to Delhi and face the Sultan. He'd probably lose his head. But what does he do? He sort of, like the song says, he picks himself up, dusts himself off, and starts all over again, and goes on and has more adventures. And he is really the personification of this idea, which you will know about, of tawakkul ala Allah, putting your trust in God. And this is really what makes him heroic, that he's so human at times, and at other times, his faith, both in God and in himself, are enormous. So he is a sort of fully rounded character. And I always remember something that Ross Dunn, my colleague, my American colleague, who has written wonderfully well on Ibn Battuta, The Adventures of Ibn Battuta. It's a sort of classic book on the travels, and Ross wrote or spoke about Marco Polo. Said, "Oh, Marco Polo is a bit of a stick man," and this is so true, that Ibn Battuta, in comparison, is a fully rounded figure, and this is really what drew me to him.
Tim, you smartly picked examples from the travels, just revealed for us the likable facets of Ibn Battuta's character. And it's very convincing why you have been his companion over a space of centuries. My translation is that he has been a very down to the earth man, and he was not into showing off about himself. Am I right?
I would say he does show off sometimes. That's a rather attractive side of his character. He doesn't sort of hide it. You know, he says, "Oh, and I was appointed to such and such position, and the Sultan gave me a salary of so many gold dinars per month." And you know, he really displays his credentials, proud of his CV, his curriculum vitae.
I think we definitely need to get back to this interesting topic on Ibn Battuta's personality and explore deeper layers of his character. Now, I again would like to return to your story, as I'm very curious to know, when did you first get to know Ibn Battuta's travels?
Well, I suppose he'd always been a presence. I studied Arabic at university, but I was a bit of a late starter. I started off with Latin and Greek and did kind of half a degree in Latin and Greek, and then changed to Arabic. So I kind of missed out the more fun things that people tend to read when they begin Arabic. And one of them is Ibn Battuta. So I never got to read him. And then, well, I mean, it's a bit of a silly story, but I came out of my house in Sana'a in Yemen, and there was a guy who used to come with a wheelbarrow and sell boiled potatoes. And you know, passers-by would buy them, and you eat them with some spices and things. They were a really nice snack. And one day I was eating a potato outside my house, batata in Arabic, and this old guy said to me, "Oh, you think you're clever? Where does the name batata come from potato?" And I kind of said, I don't know, maybe it's from South America or the Caribbean or something. He said, no, it comes from Ibn Battuta.
Oh, wow. Funny.
Now, I mean, this is, of course, I hate to say it, it's nonsense, but it kind of got me thinking, he couldn't possibly have anything to do with potatoes, could he? And it planted it in my head, the thought in my head. And I was in a bookshop quite soon after in the main souk in Sana'a, and there was his travels bookshelf. And I thought, I'm going to get this and read this. And that's really how I got into him to begin with.
The book was in Arabic in the shelf?
Yes, I read it first in Arabic, which I'm always pleased that I did read it first in Arabic. You know, it's a beautiful book in Arabic. People at the time said it wasn't a great literary work, but to me it is. In fact, it had quite an interesting sort of history, because he wrote it for the Sultan of Morocco at the time, Abu Ainan, and either Abu Ainan or Ibn Battuta himself got a sort of literary advisor, or amanuensis, you might call him, who was called Ibn Juzay, who helped him to write it. And in fact, Ibn Battuta dictated the book to Ibn Juzay. All the nice passages are probably a bit sort of tarted up by Ibn Juzay. So it is actually a good read. Yeah.
I do agree, although I've read the translated versions in English and Farsi, not the original text. I feel really jealous that you can read the travels in Arabic and you can have close encounters with what Ibn Battuta dictated to Ibn Juzay at the time in the court of Sultan Abu Inan.
Yeah, sorry, it was a close encounter because the edition that I got, I remember it, I can still picture it. It had no footnotes, no commentary, no nothing. So I was kind of completely lost and traveling with him in these confusing places, and it made it all the more exciting.
Tim, from this point, let's move on to your professional life. You have written and published outstanding works on Ibn Battuta and presented the BBC documentary series Travels with a Tangerine, tracing Ibn Battuta's path. What inspired you to pursue these works? I mean, reading the book is one thing and retracing the travel path is another thing, or better say, another adventure. What brought you to this adventure?
Yes, yeah, very good question, actually. I mean, I would immediately say, oh, because I liked Ibn Battuta, I liked the book. But it's a jump from doing that to retracing his steps, yeah, and spending many, many years, a lot of money, a lot of effort doing it. And I suppose at the time I had written my first book, which was about Yemen. I called it Yemen Travels in Dictionary Land. And it tried to sort of interpret the country, a country that was not very well known outside itself, and you know, where it was known, it was often very much misunderstood. I tried to kind of interpret, to translate, if you like, Yemen for readers outside the country, and you know, I think that it was quite a successful attempt. You know, I still get people writing to me and liking that book 25 years on, God, a quarter of a century. And I kind of thought, I was reading at the time when it was coming out, I was reading Ibn Battuta, and I thought, oh, maybe here is a vehicle for doing something a bit similar for the whole of the Islamic world. And I mean, I know that sounds terribly grandiose. You know, who am I to do this in a sense? But I don't think anyone had thought of it before. But if you look at Ibn Battuta's book, he was writing at a time which was, in a way, almost as important as those early conquests, those early futuhat, as they're called in Arabic. When Islam expanded and kind of got across the old Islamic world. And he was in the time when it was reaching a new Islamic world, you know, where I am, Malaysia, Southeast Asia, across the Sahara into, you know, sub-Saharan Africa, etc., and all these interesting places. And he was kind of, if you like, surfing this wave of expansion into what is now the Islamic world as it is today on the map. And I thought, well, maybe, you know, I can use this wave myself and surf with Ibn Battuta and use it as a vehicle for sort of trying to put across and explain this very diverse and fascinating world that's actually not always very well understood outside itself.
This is great. And an exceptional choice of vehicle Ibn Battuta Travels is for this impressive motif, and you have succeeded in reclaiming the particular era on which you were wishing to spotlight.
You use the word reclaim, which is one way of looking to it, looking at it, and it's true in a sense. But I always think of myself as writing what in Arabic you would call a veil. And it means a tail, or a tail on an animal, or a tail on a dress, something that drags behind you. But in literary terms, it means a kind of follow-up to a book. So, you know, I've always seen myself as writing a veil, a tale to Ibn Battuta's continuing his journey where he left off. All right, there's a small matter of 700 years between us, or 650. But you know, what is time? I think literature is what collapses time.
I think your follow-up has attracted broader sets of audiences who were less familiar with the adventures of Ibn Battuta, and in that respect, those works, including your books and the documentary, have added further value to the travels. Tim, here I have a big question to ask. As a person who has retraced that route once taken by Ibn Battuta, what is your favorite destination visited by Ibn Battuta across his travels, and what makes it special for you?
I don't know if favorite is the word, but the one that probably has kind of stuck in my mind and that haunts me, and it haunts me and it will haunt me until the day I die, it's a place called Ambaka, which no one will ever have heard of except me. When Ibn Battuta was in India, and I mentioned earlier he'd been appointed ambassador to China, and he traveled through India. And during the course of these travels, he was passing through what's now Madhya Pradesh state, and he lit upon this extraordinary scene. And there'd been fighting between Muslim forces and Hindu forces, and several of the Hindu commanders had been killed, and they were being cremated. Their bodies were being burnt, and at least one of them, his wife decided to jump into the funeral pyre and be burned to death, which is this old custom of women becoming sati, exactly. And women who did this were regarded as having been turned into something divine. Yeah. So Sati Mata is this sort of divine woman who has jumped into her husband's funeral pyre. And Ibn Battuta describes the scene, and he describes it very, very in a very detailed way. And he said there was this place where there was a tank of water between 4 small temples, and all of it was overhung with trees whose branches intertwined so closely that the light of the sun could scarcely penetrate. And then from here, the people processed down the path to an even lower place where there was a lot of water. And that was where the funeral pyre was set up. And Ibn Battuta watched this he was actually sitting on his horse at the time. And he said, I was so shocked by seeing the woman jump into the fire that I swooned and almost fell off my horse. And there's something about the horror of the scene, obviously horrific to a Muslim observer or to most people, that kind of burned it into his memory. And I eventually found this place, nobody else had done before, and it was exactly the same. The trees, the same trees, they were trees that were older than Ibn Battuta, and they were still there. And I followed the path down, and there was the place with much water. The water had dried up, and there was a sort of boulder which was blackened by fire. It was definitely the very spot, and it was really like seeing a ghost. But the ghost didn't go away. You were inside the ghost of the scene, and it wasn't a ghost because it was real. And I was almost overcome by it myself. A very creepy place, and I kind of wanted to get away, but the guy who was driving me had been wandering around. He got into my travels, Mr. Dewan, and he said, no, come and see this, quick, come. And he took me to this other place, which was 10 minutes walk away, and it was an enclosure of monuments to the women who had burned themselves to death at this spot, and some of them were still being worshipped today. They had, fresh offerings and everything else, fresh red color marked on them. And one of them was, I went into it quite deeply. It was the exact date Ibn Battuta's witnessing this scene. And here's this this old book, people look at old books and they think, oh, it's just an old book. But when you can actually get inside the book, so to speak, and you can cross time. I mean, it was the nearest thing to time travel, and it haunts me still. And as I say, it always will haunt me. But that's just one of many places. I mean, that's probably the one that was most striking. I had many experiences like that.
That was an absolutely touching and telling experience, Tim. Thanks so much for recounting your unusual mix of emotions from visiting that special spot where Saudi has been happening and sharing with us your impressions graphically. I'm sure there are lots of more from that kind which you could tell us, but your pick was literally fantastic. In your documentary series, you once said Ibn Battuta Travels was not only mind-broadening, but mind-blowing. Were you challenged by his account, and what was your most mind-blowing experience? You have already touched upon some of them. Is there any other outstanding one you may be keen to share with us?
Well, that was one, and it really was mind-blowing. I mean, you just said that was I challenged by his account, and yes, I mean a lot of it was chat. I didn't just float around and find everything that he wrote about. No, of course you had to look for things, and that was often a great challenge. And often you had to take into account lapses in his memory, and well, for example, he visits staying in India. He visits of course, the Qutb Minar, as it's called, the great, what is it? Is it 13th century, I think, tower, minaret in Delhi. And he talks about its size and everything else, and it's all very, very accurate. And then he mentions they're building another one, which is even bigger. And he says the staircase is big enough for 2 elephants to go up side by side. And this other tower was never finished, but the stump is there. And I rather naughtily, you're not meant to, I kind of climbed a fence and got into it. And I got inside it. And in fact, the staircase was very broad, but it was only big enough for 1 elephant. So, you're challenged by, why did he misremember it as being wider than it was? But the times when his memory is almost photographic, like the time at the Sati site, are very, very many, and they're spread across his entire travels. And another sort of mind-blowing experience was one that I had in West Africa, in Guinea-Conakry. And, well, as all of Ibn Battuta's stories are, it's a long story, but he was staying with the ruler of the Empire of Mali. And he says that on the 2 festivals, the 2 Eids, Islamic festivals, his sort of court poet come musician come bard would bring out this musical instrument and play it. And to cut a very long story short, the instrument is still there. Not even it's not the kind of instrument, it is apparently the very instrument. And I sort of went to see it, and it's kept in this little hut, a very revered, almost sacred hut in a little village in Guinea, right next to the border with the modern country of Mali. And I got in to see it, after, it was a long story, lots of adventures and being detained by the police and so on. But there was this instrument. It's a balafon, which is a bit like a kind of marimba or xylophone type thing. They would only play it still on the 2 festivals, but they did sort of put on a concert with other modern versions, which was wonderful. But the guy who showed it to me was, and this was in a sense even more mind-blowing, he was the direct descendant of the guy that Ibn Battuta stayed with. And he had his sort of personal genealogist, who they would call a Jeli, and he gave me his genealogy back to Ibn Battuta's host, and everything was it was all interlaced with wallahi, my God, this is true, that he is so and so, son of so and so, wallahi, son of so and so, wallahi, and all of this, and there's the descendant of Battuta's host, who is my host, and I realized that, Ibn Battuta said his host was wearing the specially tied turban and wearing the specially embroidered robe, and so was my host. Obviously a kind of up-to-date version. It was almost as if the guy walked off the pages of Ibn Battuta's book, and while his relatives were playing these other balafons at night in the dark in this village in the depths of Guinea, we danced. The old master of the lord of the balafon, the Balatiki, as he's called in Mai, and we danced round and round and round. And I thought, this really is mind-blowing.
Balatiki and Belafon, we should check their magical sounds on YouTube. I really enjoyed listening to your evocative memoir from tracing Ibn Battuta's footsteps. Those unique experiences can be a perfect finish to our today's episode. We will continue our conversation on many other aspects of Ibn Battuta's journeys, which I eagerly look forward to that. Thank you, team, for being our guest today, and thank you everyone for listening to Oriental Journeys. Our editor and creative consultant is Kate O'Connell. Adegon Kars and Ashkan Bahrani are our content advisors from Monash University. Frank Joachim reads the passages from the Travels of Ibn Battuta. The reading passages are selected from the English translation of Rihla, The Travels of Ibn Battuta, translated by Hamilton Gibb, published by Hakluyt Society. The music was composed by Ali Goegin, and Hamid Mohebbi is our sound engineer.